It all started on a cold December night in Manhattan, where laughter spilled out from a luxurious rooftop bar owned by billionaire heir Kian Wolfhart, a man known more for his scandals than his business moves. With whiskey in his hand and a challenge in his eyes, he looked at his equally entitled friends and smirked. What if I picked someone from the bottom and made her my wife? Just for fun. The group erupted in laughter, clinking glasses, unaware that this cruel dare would set off a storm that would change Kian's life forever. That's when she walked in. Aura. A quiet woman with makeup so thick it looked like armor, moving like a ghost behind a serving tray, barely seen by anyone except Kian's gaze that paused. Not because she was stunning, but because something about her felt unfamiliar in a room filled with fakeness. Her, Kian said, pointing at Aura, and the room went silent. Everyone turned. Her hands trembled, the tray shaking slightly as she looked up, her eyes wide behind bold eyeliner and lashes. What's your name? He asked, standing. Aura, she whispered. Marry me, he smirked, the room echoing with a stunned silence. Right now. Just for laughs. She froze. Her heart pounded. Was this a cruel joke or a way out of her miserable life? Working 3 shifts, raising her younger brother alone after her mother's death, battling eviction every other month, this could be her escape. Or her downfall. You're joking, she said, her voice cracking. Maybe, he shrugged, amused by the tension. Maybe not. But imagine the look on my mother's face when I bring you to the mansion. The crowd laughed, cruel and sharp like knives. Aura's chest tightened, but she looked at the pile of unpaid bills in her bag, her sick brother sleeping alone in a cold apartment, and she made a choice. Okay, she whispered, and the laughter stopped. I'll marry you. Kian blinked, surprised. Wait, you're serious? Aren't you? She replied, matching his energy with eerie calm. His friends hollered, clapping, filming, jeering, and within 24 hours, they stood before a shady Vegas officiant in a hotel chapel made of neon lights and fake flowers. Kian wore designer. Aura wore a bridesmaid gown she'd found at a thrift store and layered makeup so no one would see how scared she was. The words, I do, fell out of her lips like broken glass. She didn't smile. He did, but only for the cameras. And as flashbulbs popped and hashtags trended, joke wedding, wait. He actually did it. Aura stood beside her new husband, numb, quiet, and wondering what she had just sold her soul for. That night, back in New York, he tossed her the guest bedroom key like she was part of a game. We'll divorce in 6 months. I'll even give you something for your time. But she didn't respond. She quietly unpacked, hung her clothes on hangers that smelled like money, and tucked her brother's photo under her pillow. But Kian watched her from the hallway longer than he expected. She wasn't like the others. She didn't beg, flatter, or ask for access to his world. She stayed invisible. Yet something about that felt wrong. And then came the first real moment. A morning, just 5 days into the marriage, when she forgot to lock her door. Kian walked in, half asleep, looking for his phone, only to see Aura in the mirror. Barefaced, hair down, her scar exposed near her jawline. He gasped audibly, stumbling backward, eyes wide. You! He stuttered, and then the blood drained from his face. He fainted, crashed right onto the floor like his body shut down. Aura screamed, rushing to help him, but he lay unconscious for almost 40 seconds. When he woke up, he stared at her in silence, shaken not by her appearance, but by recognition. He had seen her before, not here, not like this, but somewhere. Haunting. The joke had just turned into something tangible, something personal. And Aura? She walked away from the mirror, quietly putting her makeup back on, as if rebuilding her walls, brick by brick, stroke by stroke. Because what Kian didn't know yet was that marrying her was the biggest mistake and the most important choice of his life. Aura wasn't born with a silver spoon, but with a cracked spoon in a rusted kitchen drawer in a neighborhood the world forgot. Her childhood home in Brooklyn was a place where dreams barely made it past the front door, and hope died on the third overdue notice. Her mother, a beautician who worked double shifts in a rundown salon, raised Aura and her younger brother Jace single-handedly after their father disappeared into debt and shame. From the age of 10, Aura sat behind the salon chairs, watching women transform under brushes, powders, and lipstick, their tears buried under foundation, their stories hidden in mascara strokes. That's where she learned that makeup wasn't vanity. It was armor. It was a shield against a world that judged too fast and hurt too easily. By the time she turned 16, Aura could contour pain into confidence and draw eyeliner sharp enough to cut through insults. But life had no mercy. When her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, Aura dropped out of school to work full-time, waitressing by day, cleaning salons by night, and freelancing makeup jobs in between. She wasn't just a sister anymore. She was a guardian, a provider, a girl who had to grow up too fast while hiding her exhaustion behind perfect winged liner. Her makeup kit became her survival bag. Her world was routine. Wake up, layer on the mask, go serve people who never saw her, protect Jace, repeat. She had no time for love, no space for dreams, but she dreamed anyway. Tiny daydreams of owning her little makeup studio. Not for glamour, but for healing. For helping girls like her mom feel beautiful again. She kept a journal, hidden in her closet, filled with sketches of designs for her future salon, scribbled ideas, quotes she'd cling to on bad days, and names of brands she wanted to create one day. But every time she'd start to believe she was meant for more, something would knock her back down. Landlords raising rent, customers walking out without tipping, men leering at her instead of listening to her, and the worst, people treating her like she was invisible unless she painted herself into someone worth noticing. That's why she wore heavy makeup, not because she loved it, but because the world respected her more when she looked flawless. Beneath the layers were dark circles, scars from acne she couldn't afford to treat, a faint birthmark by her jaw she'd learned to hide, and eyes that had seen too much. She built her life on silence and sacrifice. Even the night she met Kian, she had been working double shifts, her feet swollen, her heart racing from a near eviction warning earlier that day. She almost didn't take the extra shift at the rooftop bar, but the tips were worth the pain. She didn't expect to be noticed. Definitely not by a man who wore wealth like perfume. When Kian pointed at her, she thought he was asking for something, not someone. When he proposed, mockingly, publicly, she said yes, because survival doesn't come with pride. She didn't tell him about Jace sleeping in a friend's basement that week, or how she had sold her mother's last piece of jewelry to pay for food. She didn't say anything because Aura had learned long ago. Her story didn't matter to people like him. But that didn't mean she didn't have one. It didn't mean she was weak. Every fake eyelash she wore, every stroke of concealer, every bold red lipstick was a battle cry, a reminder that while the world may never love her raw and broken, she would still show up, fierce, untouchable, unshaken. Yet something strange happened after that rushed Vegas wedding. She expected ridicule, commands, and distance, but Kian barely spoke to her. He seemed disturbed, confused, especially after that morning he saw her barefaced. She noticed how he looked at her, like he knew her from somewhere deeper. But Aura didn't press. She stayed in her lane, cooked for herself, paid attention to Jace's schoolwork online, and tried not to fall apart. Still, at night, when the house was quiet, she'd sit by the window and apply her skincare slowly, almost ritualistically, staring at her real face and whispering promises to her mother's spirit. One day, I'll make it. One day, I won't need a mask. But for now, she wore it. Because underneath it all, she was still a girl trying to survive a war the world didn't know she was fighting. And she had no idea that her story and his were already connected in ways that would soon come crashing down on them both. Aura stood in front of the full-length mirror, the soft fabric of her dress hanging loosely around her. She adjusted the hem, carefully pulling at the edges, hoping to hide the fraying seams that had been there since last season. There was something about the dress that made her feel both out of place and desperate to fit in. a constant tug-of-war between the life she had lived and the world Kian had thrust her into. She had known he was rich. No, not just rich. He was wealthy in a way that made everything about him, his world, his touch, feel foreign. Her world was built on struggle. Every dollar she earned had a story attached to it, every small victory carved out of hardship, and every setback a reminder of the dreams that always seemed to slip further away. She had survived by being invisible, by staying unnoticed, by wearing a mask that the world was comfortable seeing. Kian, on the other hand, had never known a day when survival was a question. He had the luxury of choice, the privilege of not worrying about the next paycheck, the next eviction notice, or the next meal. Everything in his world came easily, casually, as if the rules of life didn't apply to him in the same way they applied to people like her. But that morning, in the thick of a joke that seemed to define everything between them, the true distance between their worlds had hit her harder than the cold slap of reality. Kian had spoken to her like a plaything, a disposable object that he could cast aside with a laugh, a little amusement in his voice. "Will you marry me? Just for a laugh?" He had said it with such nonchalance, as if the idea of her being a joke in his world didn't matter, as if her worth was a punchline that didn't need to be taken seriously. To him, it was all a game, a light-hearted bet to see if she would bite, if she would go along with the joke. But for her, there was no laughter. There was only the crushing weight of her mother's illness, the pressure of supporting her brother, and the constant, gnawing fear of losing everything. Aura had said yes because she had no other choice. She had seen the mockery in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was a temporary fixture, a momentary distraction to amuse himself. She had heard the whispers of his friends around the bar, their laughter echoing in the background, and she had known. She wasn't supposed to matter. She wasn't supposed to be anything more than a passing story. But for her, this wasn't a game. This wasn't something she could laugh off. This was life. This was survival. There was no room for joke proposals when your next paycheck could be the difference between keeping the lights on or not. No room for an empty marriage contract when you were already in a war with yourself, fighting to make it to tomorrow. As Kian walked around the penthouse, pacing with the air of someone whose biggest worry was which yacht to take to his weekend getaway, Aura couldn't help but feel the invisible line that separated their realities pulling tighter and tighter. He didn't understand. He couldn't. Not when his life had been handed to him on a silver platter. Not when his problems were so far removed from hers, they might as well have been on different planets. His questions about her life, her past, felt shallow, almost intrusive. He'd ask about her family, about her struggles, but only when it suited his curiosity. He wasn't asking to understand. He was asking to check boxes, to fill in gaps in a story that he had no intention of reading. Every time she tried to speak about her reality, he'd deflect with a joke, a smirk, as if the very idea of her life being hard was absurd. He had no idea what it was like to go to bed hungry or to worry about how to pay the bills. He didn't know what it was like to live in a world that constantly reminded you that you were just one mistake away from losing everything. To him, love and life were games, choices made in the comfort of knowing you'd never lose. But to Aura, every decision was life or death. The makeup she wore every day wasn't just to look pretty. It was to hide the pain, to shield her from the world's judgment, to protect herself from the harshness of a society that only valued people when they looked flawless, when they had something to offer. It was survival. And yet, here she was, trapped in this gilded cage with Kian, playing a part she never wanted to play, pretending to be someone she wasn't, just for the chance to keep herself afloat for one more day. The reality of it was suffocating. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt toward him, the undeniable chemistry that sparked between them. But that didn't change the fact that his world wasn't hers, that the gap between them wasn't something they could bridge with a laugh or a flirtation. The weight of the situation hung heavy on her shoulders as she stood in the mirror, looking at her reflection, half made up, half herself. Who was she in this moment? Was she the woman who had spent years building a life from nothing, Or was she just the punchline of a rich man's joke? And then there was the question that terrified her the most. What happened if she let herself fall in love with him? What would happen when the joke wore off, when the laughter died down, and Kian's real world came crashing back in? Would he still see her then? Or would she just become another forgotten chapter in the story of his life? She looked at her phone, hoping for a message from her brother Jace. Anything to ground her in reality, to remind her that there was more to her life than this moment. But there was nothing. Just silence. The absence of support made her feel even more alone, even more out of place in a life she hadn't asked for. It was clear to her now. This marriage, this joke, was never about love. It was about survival, plain and simple. Kian didn't understand that. He didn't need to. But she did. And that's what made the whole thing sting. Because she knew the truth that he didn't. If she let this go on, if she continued to play along with his game, she would be trapped in a life she didn't want. A life she didn't belong in. But what was her alternative? Walk away? From a chance to escape? From a chance to build something more? The thought haunted her, gnawing at her like the hunger she tried to forget. This was the game she had to play now. And if she was going to survive, she had to win. No matter the cost. No matter who laughed. But Kian had no idea just how much he had already changed everything for her. He had no idea that, in her twisted way, he had given her a chance at something more. A chance to fight for the future. A chance to rewrite the story she had always lived. The evening was set. Aura had no idea what to expect, but she felt something unsettling bubbling beneath the surface. It had started as a joke. A bet made between her and Kian, a wealthy man whose charm and confidence seemed to take up space in every room he walked into. The moment she stepped into his world, she knew she was out of place. But she had always been good at hiding, at pretending, at putting on a mask. And that's what she had done for him. Played the role of the woman who didn't care about his wealth, who was willing to let him take her for a ride. But tonight was different. Tonight, Kian had invited her to a charity gala, an event that was everything her life wasn't. The luxury, the opulence, the glamour. It was like stepping into a fairy tale that she could never truly belong to. She had dressed for the occasion, her makeup carefully applied to perfection, hiding the flaws, the exhaustion, and the world weariness that she carried with her every day. For Kian, it was all a game. He had invited her to this event as his date, no strings attached, just a joke he could tell to his friends about how he'd picked up a poor girl off the street. But for Aura, it was different. This wasn't just a night out. This was her chance to live in a world that had always seemed out of reach. A chance to be more than just the woman struggling to make ends meet. To be more than the invisible worker behind the scenes. But as the night wore on, Aura felt the walls closing in around her. She wasn't ready to show him the truth, the woman behind the makeup. The woman who had fought tooth and nail for every scrap of dignity she had. The woman who wasn't just the punchline of his joke. As they entered the ballroom, Kian's hand on her back guiding her through the crowd, Aura felt the eyes on her. Everyone whispering, wondering who the mysterious woman at Kian's side was. She could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their disapproval. The world they lived in wasn't for people like her. And no matter how much she pretended to fit in, she knew she didn't belong. Kian had been charming all night, his usual flirtatious self, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like he was testing her, seeing how far she would go with this charade. She had played along with the joke, pretending it didn't bother her, pretending she didn't care that he was so easily dismissing her, so easily using her as a mere accessory to his life. But as the night went on, the pressure started to mount. She excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. The fluorescent lights above the mirror reflected a face that wasn't entirely hers. The makeup hid the truth, concealed the weariness, the emotional scars that marked her existence. She stared at herself for a long moment, breathing deeply as she considered what she was about to do. It was only a matter of time before Kian would see the real her, the woman behind the perfect facade. And as much as she wanted to maintain this illusion, she knew it wasn't sustainable. He wasn't ready for the truth. He wasn't ready for the woman she had to be to survive. Slowly, she removed the makeup. It took time, each stroke of the makeup remover feeling like it was erasing the last of her carefully constructed armor. Her eyes, once hidden behind layers of mascara, now appeared softer, more vulnerable. The foundation that had covered her blemishes and imperfections was now gone, revealing skin that had known too many sleepless nights, too many worries, and too many moments of doubt. When she looked up at her reflection, she didn't recognize the woman who stared back at her. She was no longer the polished image she had become for Kian's world. She was just Aura, raw and exposed. The woman who had spent years hustling to get by. The woman who had learned to survive in a world that didn't care. She wasn't glamorous, she wasn't flawless, and she sure as hell wasn't the joke Kian thought she was. She took a deep breath, adjusting her hair and standing tall. She was ready. She had nothing left to hide. She couldn't pretend anymore. As she walked back to the ballroom, her heart raced. She knew this was it, the moment when the truth would hit, when Kian would see her for who she really was. Would he still look at her the same way? Would he still see her as the woman he had been so casually laughing with? Or would he see her as something else entirely? When she re-entered the room, Kian was talking to a group of his friends, his back turned to her. He didn't notice her at first, and for a moment, she felt a surge of power, like she was finally in control of something for once. But as he turned around, his eyes locked on hers, and for the first time that night, he didn't smile. His expression faltered, the confidence draining from his face as his eyes took in the change. He was stunned. The makeup was gone. The woman standing in front of him was not the one he had imagined. She was real. She was flawed. And suddenly, Kian didn't know what to do with her. He had spent the entire evening laughing at her, making light of their situation. But now that she was exposed, stripped of the mask she had worn for him, he didn't know how to react. He had wanted her to play along with the joke, to be the perfect little pawn in his game. But he hadn't expected her to take the mask off so soon. He hadn't expected her to show him who she was. The awkward silence between them stretched on, and it became painfully clear that Kian wasn't ready for the truth. He had wanted a joke, a temporary escape. But now, with the makeup removed, he was faced with something far more complicated. Something that didn't fit into the neat, easy narrative he had built for himself. And in that moment, Aura realized something that shook her to the core. She was done playing his game. The makeup was off. The mask had fallen. And now, it was time to see if Kian could handle the woman she truly was. Or if he would turn away, unable to accept her for what she had always been. A survivor. A woman who had fought tooth and nail to be seen, to be valued. A woman who deserved more than a punchline. The gala continued around them, but the music and laughter felt distant to Aura as she stood there, watching Kian's eyes flicker with a mix of confusion and something darker. Maybe discomfort, maybe surprise, or perhaps guilt. Whatever it was enough to make him falter in his usual confident stride. He had always believed that the world he occupied, full of wealth and status, was one that required no understanding of the struggles others faced. For him, it had always been about winning, about being the center of attention, about playing the role of the untouchable, unshakable millionaire. But tonight, Aura had thrown that world into disarray. She wasn't just the charming, attractive woman he could use as a trophy. She wasn't someone who could easily bend to his will or fall in line with his desires. And that realization, as uncomfortable as it was starting to sink in. "What do you think you're doing, Aura?" Kian asked, his voice betraying the uncertainty he had rarely shown. His gaze flickered from her face to the crowd behind her, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "I think I'm finally showing you who I really am," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling inside. "You wanted a joke, didn't you, Kian? You wanted someone you could laugh at, someone who didn't belong in your world, someone you could make fun of. She took a step closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the sound sharp and deliberate. "But now I'm not playing along anymore." He blinked, his lips parting as though he wanted to say something but didn't know how to respond. The mask he had worn as effortlessly as he wore his tailored suits was slipping, and in its place, he was beginning to see something raw in Aura's eyes, something that both unsettled and intrigued him. "You think you can just laugh at me, take me on as a joke, and then discard me when you're done," she continued, her voice growing firmer, more determined. "Well, guess what, Kian? I'm not your game piece. I'm not here for your amusement, and I'm certainly not here to be made fun of." Kian's expression shifted again, and for the first time that night, he seemed to be genuinely listening. But it wasn't just her words that were getting to him. It was the woman standing in front of him, the one who wasn't pretending, the one who was no longer hiding behind the makeup, the one who wasn't afraid to face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. This woman was unlike anyone he had ever known. She was strong, independent, and most importantly, she wasn't afraid to challenge him and the world he had built for himself. For all his wealth, his connections, his power, Kian had never been faced with someone who could make him feel this way. Aura wasn't intimidated by him. She wasn't afraid to stand her ground and speak her truth no matter the consequences. She was no longer the meek woman he had assumed her to be, the one who had played along with his joke, who had hidden behind her makeup and her false smile. She had removed the mask, literally and figuratively, and what Kian saw now was a woman who could hold her own. It made him uncomfortable, but it also made him curious. He had spent his life chasing power, thinking that the money he controlled could bend the world to his will, that his status was enough to intimidate anyone into submission. But now, here was this woman, this stranger, who didn't care about his money, didn't care about his power, and was calling him out for the very things he had always taken for granted. Her words stung, but they also challenged him to rethink everything he had ever believed about himself. "You think this is all just a game?" she asked, her gaze intense, unwavering. "That you can play with people's lives, their emotions, like they're nothing more than pieces on a chessboard? Well, I'm done being a pawn in your game. I'm done being the joke you laugh at behind your back." Kian's breath hitched. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. The confident, smug man who had walked into this room so sure of his position in the world was now questioning everything. The arrogance that had defined him for so long was beginning to crack. The reality was that Aura wasn't intimidated by his wealth, and that realization struck him harder than any insult could have. He had never been challenged like this before, not by anyone. Sure, there had been women, lots of them, but none had ever dared to challenge him the way Aura was doing now. None had ever made him question his own behavior, his assumptions about the world. None had ever stripped him of his confidence so thoroughly. He had expected her to cower. He had expected her to apologize for making him uncomfortable. But instead, she was standing tall, unapologetically herself. And somehow, in that moment, he found himself impressed, intrigued by her courage, her strength, and her refusal to let him control the situation. For the first time in his life, Kian was forced to confront the reality that not everyone was impressed by his money, his wealth, and his lifestyle. Not everyone wanted what he could offer. And most of all, not everyone was going to play along with his games. "I never thought you'd challenge me like this," he said, his voice quieter now, softer, as though he were finally beginning to see her in a new light. "You've got no idea what it's like, Kian," she replied, shaking her head, her tone softening but still carrying the weight of everything she had been through. "You think your money gives you the right to do whatever you want, but I'm not some toy you can throw away when you're done with me. I have a life, I have dreams, and I won't let you trample all over them just because you think you can." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with tension, and Kian found himself struggling to find the words to make this right. But the truth was, he wasn't sure how to make it right anymore. He wasn't sure if there even was a way. But one thing was clear. Aura had changed something in him. She had made him see the world in a way he never had before. For once, he wasn't the one in control. For once, he wasn't the one with all the answers. And for the first time, he wasn't sure what would happen next. Would he continue to play the role of the millionaire who could buy everything and everyone? Or would he step into a new reality, one where money didn't hold the power it once did? Where did he have to learn to face people as equals, not as pawns in his game? The night was supposed to be one of celebration, a lavish party where Kian's wealth and status could shine, a chance for him to parade his new wife as the latest accessory in his luxurious life. But instead, it was turning into the most humiliating experience of his life. As the celebration carried on, the relentless flashes of cameras suddenly grew louder, the flashing lights almost blinding as the paparazzi swarmed from every angle, their lenses focused on him and Aura. He had thought that his status and his money would protect them from the public's scrutiny, but no amount of wealth could shield him from the firestorm that was about to break loose. It started as a few whispers, a handful of photos shared by a reckless photographer who had managed to catch a candid moment. But within minutes, it escalated into something far worse. The headlines were unavoidable, plastered across every tabloid and every social media platform. The photos were brutal. In every shot, Aura's makeup was smudged, the exhaustion of her long, tiresome day etched clearly on her face. Her hair was messy, not styled the way Kian had expected it to be, and her clothes, though elegant, were overshadowed by the rawness of her appearance. The photos screamed one thing: ugly bride. The public was ruthless. The backlash was immediate. Kian's heart raced in his chest as he scrolled through the app, reading the comments that were flooding in. "What a disaster," one read. "Millionaire marries an ugly woman. What a joke. She doesn't even look like she belongs here. Is this his idea of a joke? She doesn't even fit the image of his lifestyle." Kian's pulse quickened as the humiliation set in. He had been so sure that this would be the perfect act, the perfect story to tell, a joke he could laugh off. But now the joke had backfired. The narrative he had wanted to control was slipping out of his hands, and he had no idea how to stop it. Every magazine, every social media influencer, and every online forum was echoing the same sentiment. Aura was an embarrassment. She didn't belong in his world. The photos weren't just cruel. They were a direct attack on Aura, and by extension, on Kian. The photos took everything from her: her dignity, her confidence, and the tiny bit of trust she had started to have in him. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a betrayal. The worst part was, Kian could feel it. He was part of the problem. He had always been so quick to dismiss her, to assume she would fit neatly into the role he had assigned her. But now, as the world laughed and mocked her, he realized just how wrong he had been. The tabloids didn't just see her as an ugly bride. They saw her as a fool, someone who wasn't worthy of Kian's wealth and fame. They didn't understand the woman behind the makeup, the one who had been struggling, striving to make a life for herself despite the challenges she had faced. To them, Aura was nothing more than an accessory to a joke. And now, that joke was being broadcast for the world to see. "Aura!" Kian called out, his voice frantic. She was standing in front of a mirror, eyes wide with disbelief as she scrolled through the pictures on her phone, her face draining of color with every new headline she saw. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as she absorbed the weight of the criticism. He had never felt more powerless in his life. "Aura, he started, but his words felt hollow. What could he say? How could he fix this? There was no apology big enough to undo the damage, no excuse to justify the treatment she was getting. "It's not your fault, Kian," Aura said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't even turn to face him, but Kian could hear the coldness in her tone. "It's mine. I thought I could do this. I thought I could pretend that I belonged here. But I never did. I was just a joke to you." Her words were a slap in the face. Every word she spoke echoed the pain she was feeling, the realization that what she had thought was a temporary situation had turned into something much darker. She wasn't just the ugly bride in the photos. She was the victim of a cruel joke, one that Kian had played with her feelings. He had made her feel special, beautiful even, only to have the world tear that image apart. He had let the world see her at her worst, and it had cost her everything. Kian's heart sank as he watched her retreat into herself, the woman who had once been full of hope and laughter now shrinking away from the world. It wasn't just the press that had hurt her, it was his own betrayal of her trust. The moment he had allowed the joke to go too far, he had broken something inside her. "Aura. I never meant for any of this to happen," Kian said, stepping toward her. But she shook her head, not looking at him, her face a mask of pain. "You never meant for it to happen, but it did. I'm the one who has to live with the consequences, Kian. I'm the one who has to face the world now, while you hide behind your wealth and status." Her words were sharp, cutting through him like a blade. She was right. In the end, she was the one who would be blamed for all of this. She would be the one to endure the ridicule, the harsh judgment, while Kian could simply retreat into his comfortable life and forget about it all. He wasn't the one who would have to fight to rebuild her reputation, to pick up the shattered pieces of her confidence. She was, and it was all his fault. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The world outside had already moved on, the tabloids printing the next scandal. But for Kian and Aura, this was just the beginning. The damage had been done, and it was impossible to undo the hurt. He had used her, humiliated her, and now she had to decide whether she could ever trust him again. The damage to their relationship wasn't just about the photos. It was about the trust that had been broken, the boundaries that had been crossed. The joke he had made of her, the public humiliation she had suffered, wasn't something that could be easily fixed with apologies or grand gestures. The foundation of their relationship had cracked, and the question now was whether it could ever be repaired. Would Kian be able to prove that he wasn't the man the world saw him as? Or would he remain the person who used people for his own amusement, unable to see the damage he caused until it was too late? The following days were a blur of humiliation and pain for Aura. The world seemed to turn against her, and with each new story, each cruel comment, it felt like the walls were closing in. She couldn't escape the tabloids, the whispers in the streets, or the hateful messages flooding her phone. Everywhere she went, she was reminded of the joke she had become. The facade Kian had created for them, for her, was crumbling fast. What had started as a temporary arrangement, a way to escape her reality and live in his world for just a little while, had turned into an unbearable nightmare. No matter how much Kian apologized, no matter how many times he tried to convince her it wasn't his fault, Aura couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Kian had used her as a pawn in his own game, a joke to amuse himself and his wealthy friends. What had he thought would happen? That the public would laugh along with him? That they would somehow understand the absurdity of his scheme and find it charming? But the public didn't understand. They didn't care for the backstory or the reasons behind his actions. All they saw was a beautiful woman, who didn't fit their idea of perfection, being mocked and humiliated by the man she thought loved her. No amount of wealth, no number of apologies, could erase the sting of being treated like nothing more than an accessory. It wasn't just the humiliation that broke her, it was the realization that deep down, she had known this was coming. From the moment she had agreed to play this part in Kian's life, she had known she was setting herself up for failure. She had let herself believe that somehow she could change him, that she could win his heart, even if it meant playing the fool. But now, as the world turned on her, Aura realized she wasn't the fool. Kian was. He was the one who had built this illusion around their marriage, the one who had put her in this impossible position. Her emotions were raw, her heart aching with a combination of anger and sadness. She had trusted Kian, believed in the man he had shown her during their brief, passionate moments together. She had even started to dream of a future with him, one where she could fit into his world, not as a joke, but as his equal. But now, that dream seemed foolish. The man she had thought she knew was not the man the world saw. And in that moment, Aura realized that the only way she could regain control of her life was to walk away. She could no longer stay in a relationship built on lies, a relationship that had only caused her pain. But leaving wasn't easy. Kian had made it clear how much he wanted to fix things, how much he was willing to do to make it right. But nothing he could do would change the truth of what had happened. No grand gesture would erase the hurt. No apology would mend the shattered trust between them. It was on the night of another failed apology that Aura made the decision. She packed her things in silence, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. She didn't know where she would go, what her future would look like, but she knew she couldn't stay. As she stood by the door, her suitcase packed and her heart breaking, Kian appeared in the doorway, his face a mixture of regret and desperation. "Aura, please," he begged, his voice shaking. "Don't leave. I know I made a mistake. I never meant for any of this to happen. You mean more to me than you know." But Aura couldn't listen to him anymore. She had heard the same words over and over, and they no longer held any weight. "You never meant for it to happen," she repeated softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "But it did. And I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with it." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as she stepped past him. "I'm leaving, Kian. I'm leaving to find my own way. I can't stay in this toxic world anymore. I need to find myself again." Kian reached out to stop her, his hand brushing against her arm. "Aura, please. Don't go. I love you." Aura's heart ached at his words, but she knew they weren't enough anymore. She pulled away, her hand on the door handle. "I can't be with someone who doesn't see me, Kian. I can't be with someone who treats me like a joke." She opened the door, taking one last look at the life she had thought was hers, at the man she had once believed would love her for who she was. But now, she saw only a man who had used her for his own amusement, a man who would never understand the pain he had caused. With a heavy heart, she stepped outside, the cool night air hitting her face as she walked away from the life she had known, from Kian, and from everything that had led her to this point. But as she walked, a strange sense of clarity washed over her. She wasn't alone. She was stronger than she had ever been. And no matter where her journey took her, she was determined to rebuild herself, to rise from the ashes of the life Kian had destroyed. As she walked away, Kian stood in the doorway, watching her disappear into the night, a mix of regret, guilt, and sorrow in his eyes. He had lost her, not just because of the joke, but because he had never truly seen her for who she was. Now, it was too late to take it all back. But what Kian didn't know was that Aura wasn't walking away alone. There was a new sense of power within her now, a fire that had been lit by her own strength and resilience. She was no longer the woman who had been humiliated and mocked. She was a woman who had found her voice, and she was going to use it to create a life that was hers and hers alone. As Aura stepped into her new life, the weight of her past continued to shadow her every move. Despite the freedom she had gained by leaving Kian behind, the scars, both physical and emotional, were harder to escape. She had always hidden her past with layers of makeup and a carefully constructed persona. It wasn't just the makeup that concealed her true self. It was the mask she had worn for years to protect herself from the world, from the hurt she had endured, and from the man who had unknowingly been a part of her darkest memories. No one knew about the scar that marked her life, the one Kian had inadvertently left behind. He was the one who had hurt her, the one who had triggered a painful chapter she had buried deep within her. It had happened long before their short-lived marriage, but she had never allowed herself to acknowledge it. The scar, a constant reminder of her vulnerability, had become the one thing she couldn't show the world. She had buried it beneath layers of makeup, hiding the truth even from herself. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the makeup was washed away and the world was still, the scar was there. a raw and undeniable reminder of the betrayal she had suffered. But the revelation came unexpectedly, in a moment of vulnerability, when she found herself alone in her new apartment. As she looked into the mirror, touching the faint outline of the scar that lay just below her jawline, she realized the truth. Kian wasn't the only one who had hurt her. The person who had allowed herself to stay in a relationship built on lies, the person who had stayed silent in the face of betrayal, had hurt her the most. The scar wasn't just a physical wound. It was a symbol of her own self-neglect, of the part of herself she had abandoned for the sake of a man who never truly saw her. The realization hit her hard, but it also freed her. She understood now that the pain she had been running from wasn't just about Kian or the world's judgment. It was about the way she had neglected her own worth. The scar, once a painful reminder of her past, now became a symbol of her strength, of the woman who was rising from the ashes of her old life. It was in that moment, as she stood before the mirror, that Aura made a vow to herself. She would no longer hide behind makeup, behind walls, behind anything that masked the woman she had become. The scar was part of her story, but it didn't define her. It was time to face it, to embrace it, and to finally heal. The world could see the woman she truly was, and no amount of makeup or illusion would ever change that. This was the moment when Aura realized she had been hiding not just her physical scars, but her inner strength, her resilience, and the true beauty that had always existed beneath the surface. And with this new understanding, she knew she was ready to step into her future, not as a woman defined by her past, but as a woman ready to own her truth. Aura had spent her entire life hiding behind a mask. Not just the makeup, but the invisible mask that shielded her from the world's judgment, its expectations, and most importantly from herself. The years had passed, but the deeper she buried her insecurities, the more they rooted themselves in her psyche. But that fateful night, when she found the strength to walk away from Kian, everything shifted. Walking out of her marriage, leaving behind the life she had carefully crafted, wasn't just about leaving a man. It was about finding herself. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders, and in its place, a new, unfamiliar sense of freedom blossomed. She no longer had to live under the oppressive weight of other people's expectations, nor did she have to hide behind layers of makeup to feel like she belonged. But that didn't mean the transition was easy. It was a battle within herself, a war between the woman she had always been and the woman she was trying to become. For years, Aura had been conditioned to believe that beauty, the face she showed the world, was all that mattered. She had been told, repeatedly, by society, by Kian, and even by herself, that her value was tied to her appearance. The flawless skin, the perfectly sculpted features, the makeup that could mask the real her. Those were the things that defined her in the eyes of others. And for a long time, she had believed it. She had internalized it to the point where she couldn't imagine being loved or accepted for anything else. The scar that she had hidden beneath layers of foundation had become a symbol of everything she thought she was not. A woman who wasn't enough, who wasn't beautiful, who wasn't worthy. It wasn't until she stood alone in her apartment that she understood the lie she had been living. The truth wasn't in the face that greeted her in the mirror every morning. The truth wasn't in the flawless skin or the perfectly contoured cheeks. It was in the heart that had been broken and mended, in the strength that had been built through years of struggle, and in the resilience that had never faltered. She was not defined by the makeup on her face or the superficial judgments of others. For the first time, she truly understood that her worth was not dependent on how she looked or how others saw her. It was about who she was on the inside, the woman who had fought for her independence, the woman who had found the courage to leave a life that didn't serve her, and the woman who was learning to love herself, scars and all. It was in this moment of self-reflection that Aura made a vow to herself. She would no longer allow her face, or any part of her physical appearance, to dictate how she saw herself. She was more than what others saw, more than the mask she had worn for so long. She was a woman who deserved to be seen for the depths of her soul, for the strength that ran through her veins, for the passion she carried within her heart. Slowly, day by day, Aura began to shed the layers of her old life. The makeup came off, and so did the walls she had built around herself. She embraced her vulnerability, her authenticity, and her imperfections, realizing that they were what made her truly beautiful. In time, the scar that she had once hidden became a symbol of her strength. It was no longer something to be ashamed of, but something to be proud of. A reminder of the journey she had taken to become the woman she was. She began to see herself as more than just a face in the mirror. She was a woman of substance, of character, and of undeniable strength. And the more she embraced this truth, the more the world around her began to shift. People began to see her differently, not because of her appearance, but because of the energy she radiated. Aura's confidence grew as she learned to trust herself, to trust her heart, and to trust that she was worthy of love, respect, and success, not because of how she looked, but because of who she was. It wasn't about finding validation from others anymore. It was about finding validation from within. She was enough, just as she was. No more pretending. No more hiding. She had become the woman she was always meant to be. And with each passing day, the fear of not being enough faded into the distance, replaced by a new sense of empowerment and clarity. As she stood before the mirror once again, this time without makeup, without pretense, Aura smiled. She saw a woman who had come into her own, a woman who had discovered her true worth. She saw the scars, both the ones on her skin and the ones on her heart, but instead of feeling shame, she felt pride. Those scars were a testament to her journey, to the strength she had cultivated, and to the woman she had become. No longer did she need to hide behind the makeup, the masks, or the illusions. She had discovered the most important truth of all, that her face, her appearance, was not what defined her. It was her heart, her soul, her resilience, and her unshakable belief in herself. And with that understanding, Aura stepped into her new life, ready to face whatever came her way, knowing that she was enough. Always had been, always would be. As the story hurtles toward its final emotional turn, the redemption arc becomes a pivotal moment. The millionaire who had once thoughtlessly humiliated the woman he married as a joke, now faces the consequences of his actions in a way he never anticipated. The humiliation of his wife, which was once the source of his amusement, turns into a mirror that forces him to confront his own character flaws. Realizing the depth of his mistake and the pain he caused her, he decides that no apology could be enough to erase the hurt he inflicted. But instead of retreating into his privileged world, he chooses to publicly apologize, turning the tables in a way that no one expected. In a stunning display of vulnerability, he organizes a public event, a press conference filled with cameras, reporters, and the very same people who once mocked the woman he married. There, in front of an audience that once laughed at her expense, he admits to his wrongdoings. The apology, however, is not a simple statement of regret. He reveals the full extent of his cruelty, the recklessness of his actions, and how it was driven by his own insecurities, using humor as a shield to hide from the truth. His confession shocks the media, the public, and most importantly, the woman he hurt. For the first time, he bares his soul to the world, exposing his deepest vulnerabilities. But the true power of this moment lies not in his words, but in his actions following the apology. He announces a series of public initiatives to support those affected by similar cruelty, and to use his platform to raise awareness about the importance of kindness, empathy, and accountability. This grand gesture is his attempt to atone, not just for himself, but for the damage he's done to her and others like her. This unexpected move is a stark contrast to the man he once was, a man who hid behind wealth and privilege. The apology serves as both a moment of redemption and a pivotal turning point, where he not only redeems himself in her eyes, but also in the eyes of the world, showing that change is possible even for those who seem the least likely to evolve. The revelation from the will shocks everyone in the room as it is read aloud in a stern, formal voice. The millionaire, who had always believed that the wealth and power of his family were his by right, now finds himself facing an astonishing betrayal. His father, whom he had thought he understood, had made an unexpected decision in his final moments. Instead of leaving the family fortune to his son, the heir apparent, he had chosen to leave it to the woman the millionaire had once humiliated. The woman, who had been a part of his cruel joke, now stood as the rightful heir to everything his father had built. This moment shatters his world, causing him to question everything he knew about his family's values and his place in it. The inheritance that had once felt like a guaranteed possession is no longer his, and the pride he had taken in his family's legacy turns to ash. The public shock of this announcement is compounded by the underlying message his father left behind. A statement that actions have consequences, and that wealth and power are not simply given to those who think they deserve it, but to those who prove themselves worthy of it. The woman, in contrast, finds herself both empowered and overwhelmed. She is now the owner of the family's estate, but the wealth and power come with the burden of responsibility and the reminder of all the emotional scars she has carried. As she grapples with the implications of this inheritance, she realizes that this is not just about money. It is about reclaiming her own dignity and proving to herself and to others that she has always been more than the woman behind the makeup. For the millionaire, this twist serves as a harsh wake-up call. The inheritance represents more than just financial gain. It is the embodiment of justice and retribution. His own arrogance, pride, and mistreatment of the woman have led him to this point, where the very thing he thought he deserved has slipped out of his grasp. This mini-twist forces him to confront his own shortcomings, and it becomes a turning point in his emotional journey. The inheritance, once a symbol of his entitlement, now becomes a symbol of his own reckoning. The shocking revelation comes when her brother, whom no one had ever suspected of being involved in the business world, steps forward with a quiet but firm declaration. Standing in front of a room filled with shocked family members and business associates, he calmly announces that he is the rightful heir to a hidden company, an empire that had been carefully kept under wraps for years. The news sends a ripple of disbelief through the room, as many had assumed that the entire inheritance would be handed over to the woman who had already received her share. But what no one knew, not even she, was that the real legacy of the family had been passed down secretly to her brother. The company, hidden from the public eye for generations, holds a treasure trove of untapped potential and wealth far beyond what anyone could have imagined. It is a legacy so powerful that it could change everything for the woman and her family. The twist comes not just as a surprise to the millionaire, but also to the woman herself, who finds herself questioning everything she thought she knew about her family's past and the future she had begun to rebuild. She had thought she had control of everything, the inheritance, the power, the respect. But now, with this hidden empire revealed, she realizes she is not the only one in control of the family's future. Her brother, once seen as a distant figure in the shadows, emerges as a key player in this newfound game of power and wealth. He had been the one silently groomed to take over a larger part of the family legacy, and now his presence threatens to overshadow everything she had worked for. The realization strikes her hard. Her brother's return brings with it not just competition, but a challenge to her newfound identity. She wonders if she can truly trust him, or if this revelation will tear apart the fragile world she has been building. For the millionaire, the impact of this twist is equally jarring. In his mind, he had already been knocked off his pedestal by the woman's unexpected inheritance, but now, with the brother's sudden claim to an even greater fortune, he is left questioning not just his place in the family, but his very understanding of what it means to be a part of this world. The hidden company represents not just financial wealth, but a deep, tangled web of family secrets, loyalty, and betrayal. The stakes have never been higher, and with the brother's entry into the picture, both the woman and the millionaire must navigate new emotional terrain, one filled with distrust, ambition, and the unsettling question of who truly deserves to carry the family name. The revelation hits them both like a thunderclap, shaking the very foundation of everything they had built. As they sit together, surrounded by the remnants of what had once seemed like a dream, the lawyer delivers the news that changes everything. Their marriage, the one they thought had bound them forever, was never legal. The documents they had signed in a rush, under the pressure of family expectations and public scrutiny, were invalid, an oversight that neither of them had known until now. It's a moment that feels like the rug is pulled out from under their feet, a shock that makes everything they had fought for seem uncertain. For the woman, this twist stings deeply, as she has invested everything into this union, believing that her love and commitment were more than just a mere formality. To discover that the very thing she had fought for, the validation of their love in the eyes of the law, was never truly recognized feels like a betrayal. She had given so much of herself, risking her reputation, her future, and her heart, to be with him. Now, the legal bond that was supposed to protect their future has been exposed as a fallacy. She feels vulnerable, exposed, as if everything she had believed in was built on shaky ground. For the millionaire, the news is equally devastating, though for different reasons. He had always lived his life under the expectation that he could control the outcome of any situation. His wealth, his name, and his influence, these were tools that had always worked in his favor, securing his future and his place in the world. But now, this legal flaw threatens everything. The idea that his love for her might have been marred by something as trivial as paperwork makes him question everything he had done to secure their relationship. He had thought that his wealth and status were enough to guarantee their happiness, but now he realizes that they had built their love on the wrong foundation. They had both been so focused on the external pressures, society, family, expectations, that they had neglected to properly secure their bond in a way that could withstand anything, including the law. The twist is not just legal, it's emotional and psychological. It shakes them both to their core, forcing them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about love, commitment, and what truly matters. The marriage was supposed to be the culmination of their love story, but now it feels like the beginning of something more complicated, something that could either tear them apart or bring them closer together. This revelation isn't just about paperwork or legality. It's about their ability to face the truth and decide whether their love is strong enough to transcend the mistakes of the past. As they sit in the silence that follows, they both realize something crucial. The love they share may have never been recognized by the law, but it was always real. The bond they had formed, the connection that transcended wealth and status, had always been built on genuine emotion, not legalities. The question now isn't about what the law says, but whether they can move past this hurdle and redefine their future together, in a way that honors both their love and their identities. In the midst of everything, as the world around them seems to be crashing down, the emotional climax arrives like a quiet storm. The million-dollar mansion, the family drama, the insecurities that had crept into their relationship, none of it matters at this moment. The real truth is in the unspoken connection they share, a truth that has been building silently beneath the surface all along. She stands before him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and vulnerability. But there's a strength in her eyes that he's never seen before. He knows at that moment that she is not the woman he once thought he could control or manipulate with his wealth. She is so much more than that. She had seen him when no one else had, and that revelation stirs something deep within him. It's not just about love anymore. It's about recognition, acceptance, and understanding. She had always been there for him in a way no one else had ever been, not because of his money, his status, or his name, but because of the person he truly was. The man beneath the suit, the one who had spent so many years hiding behind walls of wealth and expectation, was finally able to shed the layers he had built up over time. He reaches for her hand, his touch gentle but firm, as if to say everything that words cannot. She looks at him, and there's a shift in her expression. It's not just relief, it's realization. She had spent so much of her life trying to be something she wasn't, hiding behind makeup and facades, believing that she wasn't enough. But here, in this moment, she understands that he had seen her for who she truly was all along. She was never the ugly woman they had tried to make her out to be, and he had known that from the start. He had seen her strength, her resilience, and her beauty, even when the world couldn't. For the first time, she feels truly seen, truly loved, not for her looks or her status, but for her soul. He had chosen her, even when he didn't have to, even when society and family had given him every reason not to. And now, she can't help but choose him back. The tears that fall down her cheeks are not tears of sadness, but of liberation. It's the moment when all the weight of the world feels lighter, when the obstacles they've faced finally start to fade. She is no longer afraid of what people think, no longer afraid to be who she truly is. The love she has for him is not based on superficial things, but on a deep understanding of what it means to truly love someone. She can love him because he saw her when no one else did, because he understood the heart beneath the exterior, the pain that had been hidden away for so long. In this moment, they are not a millionaire and his ugly bride. They are two souls who have fought for each other, who have struggled and fallen, and yet have found their way back to each other. It's a love that is raw, authentic, and real, despite the imperfections and the missteps along the way. He pulls her into his arms, and as she leans into him, they both know that this moment, this choice, is the turning point. The world might have tried to tear them apart, but their love is stronger than any of the challenges they've faced. And as they stand together, holding each other in the quiet aftermath of the storm, they both realize that they are finally free. Free from the expectations, the judgments, the facades. They are just two people in love, and that's all that matters now. The resolution is simple. Love isn't about appearances, status, or wealth. It's about the person who truly sees you, the person who chooses you when no one else does. And in that moment, they choose each other, wholeheartedly and without hesitation. The love that was once overshadowed by superficial judgments and societal expectations is now unshakable, a bond that no one can ever break. The final moment lingers, charged with a question that cuts deeper than anything they've faced so far. As the camera zooms out, the image of them standing together, stronger than ever, slowly fades into the background of a quiet, serene landscape, symbolizing not just their journey, but the journey that anyone can take when they find true love. The soft music swells, guiding the audience to the emotional crescendo of the story, as the question hangs in the air, unspoken but powerful. Would you still love her if she wasn't beautiful? It's not just about physical beauty anymore. It's about the heart, the soul, the truth of who someone is when everything is stripped away. This question, though directed at the characters, is really for the audience to ponder. The camera focuses on the couple once more, their hands intertwined, their eyes locked in a gaze that speaks volumes. They have survived judgment, cruelty, and societal expectations. They've proven that love doesn't need to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be shallow. The woman, no longer hiding behind makeup or facades, now stands proudly as her true self. The man, once blind to her worth, now understands the true meaning of love. The message is clear. True love isn't about appearances. It's about how someone makes you feel when everything else fades away. As the screen fades to black, the call to action, CTA, emerges. Would you still love her if she wasn't beautiful? It's a question that resonates on a personal level, a reminder to the audience that love transcends superficial barriers, that love is about the soul, not the skin. It's a final invitation for reflection, an opportunity for viewers to consider what truly matters in relationships. The emotional fade-out leaves the audience with a sense of warmth, nostalgia, and introspection. It makes them think not just about the characters, but about their own lives and relationships. Would they love someone for who they are beneath the surface? Or would they walk away when faced with the truth? The lingering question stays with them, leaving a lasting impression as the screen fades to black and the credits begin to roll.